On behalf of Civita and the House of Literature in Bergen, Larry Diamond, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And let me start by asking you a fairly simple but rather important question. How important is this US election, 3rd of November, in your view?
Well, I think it is as important as any single election could be in an advanced industrial democracy, because it carries the possibility of either A, a continued trajectory of very steep decline in the quality of American democracy, or B, the disappearance of electoral democracy in the United States, depending on what happens on and after November 3rd.
Mm. And what does the state of democracy in America, or what does the Trump presidency say about the state of American democracy?
Well, you can look at the annual ratings of Freedom House on its 100-point scale of political rights and civil liberties, or you can look at the trend in the Economist magazine's annual rating of democracy, or you can just use your common sense. By any of those three calculations, the quality of democracy in the United States, I'd say, has been in significant and to some of us quite concerning decline for more than a decade now. And it's gotten a lot worse since Donald Trump came to power.
Right. And why do you think the United States were prone for this kind of development? Is there any particularly reason or something within the United States that has made it so vulnerable for the weakening of democratic institutions?
I think the core problem, Eric, is political polarization and the increasing tribalism of our politics. When you have people attached with a tribal and unreasoning fidelity to their political party choices, they're not engaging in any kind of objective reasoning or any kind of considered engagement with objective facts. Everything is filtered through their intense partisan bias and their intense partisan enmity toward the other party. And then you reason backward from your tribal loyalty to find some, rationalization or justification for the position that you have come to before any process of real reasoning. And this also leads to tremendous latitude for the leader of a partisan tribe to do whatever he wants and have it justified, rationalized, ignored, or condoned because he's the leader of the partisan tribe. In this case, of course, I'm talking about Donald Trump. It's bad enough when you have presidents like George W. Bush and Barack Obama who see the problem but recognize some legal and constitutional and normative constraints, and I'd say who, for all their differences, are both decent individuals deeply committed to democratic norms. But when you have, as we have for the first time, I think, in American history, a president who is an authoritarian personality and has the temperament, the values, and probably the goals in terms of political style and power of a figure like President Erdogan in Turkey or Prime Minister Orban in Hungary, then it's truly dangerous. For the first nearly 4 years now of the Trump presidency, our institutions have largely held the courts have certainly been further politicized, and we now have a crisis with the legitimacy of the judiciary and the Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court, that is going to be accentuated by the obscenely hypocritical move of the Republicans to put a new justice on the Supreme Court 38 days before the election, when in 2016 they said that 8 months before the election was too soon to act, then under President Obama. But we have, even if the rule of law leg of liberal democracy is kind of holding, and even if the liberty dimension is kind of holding, I really don't worry that I'm going to be arrested for saying to you what I'm saying. We have a real threat to the electoral dimension of liberal democracy, and it's being threatened on a daily basis by massive sustained efforts at voter suppression. It's being threatened on a daily basis by Trump's attempt to delegitimate mail-in voting during the pandemic, because he knows that many more Democrats than Republicans plan to vote by mail. It's being delegitimated in the future by a concerted effort by the Trump administration to try to bring the decennial census that is constitutionally required to a premature conclusion, so that hopefully will undercount racial minorities and therefore underrepresent them in the next US Congress and in the distribution of federal revenue. And on and on. We have an administration and a president who are not committed to democracy and the rule of law. And for the first time in American history as well, we have a major political party that's gone along with this, not, I think, because they all are united in wanting to erode and disparage our democratic norms, but because they lack the political courage in the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives to stand up to this creeping authoritarianism.
That's interesting, Larry, when you're mentioning that the Republican Party is not willing to hold President Trump accountable, and you're saying that the lack of courage. What exactly does members of Congress for the Republican Party risk if they're standing up? I mean, if they lose their seat, they will get like millions of dollars in private sector, whatever. It's just mind-boggling that they are so they're not willing to stand up for political principles.
Well, first of all, let's make clear for your audience here that they could be, many of them, at serious risk of losing their seat, okay? And the reason why I think Europeans are much more acutely well-informed about our electoral system than we are about yours, but I will remind people that we have a system of first past the post that is joined to a system of nominating candidates for the two major political parties in party primaries that take place often 6 or 7 months before the general election and have extremely low voter turnout. So who turns out in a low turnout party primary election? It's the most highly motivated. The most highly motivated are the most ideologically committed on the Democratic side as well. This has been the single greatest driver of our polarization. And since Trump is popular among these highly committed Republicans, if he opposes the renomination of a US House or Senate member and endorses one of their opponents, these incumbents have a good chance of losing, at least as of now. So they're not irrational in their fear of defeat if they turn against Trump. However, they are cowardly in doing so, and they have betrayed their obligation normatively under American democracy to defend our norms and institutions. This is a harsh and tragic thing to say, but it's true. And yes, some of them, first of all, some of them are already, quite wealthy. And second of all, others of them, would, I'd say, have very good career prospects if they leave the House or Senate. That's the general pattern. Unfortunately, way too many of them become professional lobbyists, but they do make, salaries in the $500,000 to $1 million range a year by doing so. But it's a great honor and a greatly fulfilling opportunity to be a member of the parliament of the world's most powerful democracy. And I guess it's such a powerful allure that many people are willing to sell out their principles in order to do so.
Final question, Larry. There are many speculations around what kind of scenarios we could expect here. Obviously, there are many mail-in votes that we don't know how will turn out because many of the states don't have the experience of managing this. What are your nightmare scenarios, and what do you think or hope for?
Well, what I hope for is that we'll have a free and fair election to determine who will be president of the United States from January 2021 to January 2025. That means that as a wide array of distinguished Republican and Democratic former office holders have come together behind a new campaign, it means very simply count every vote and ensure that every American citizen has an unobstructed right to vote. Those two principles are being challenged right now, but there's a tremendous amount of energy in American civil society and in the career officials who administer the vote in most states to ensure that this will happen anyway. What I fear is that there will be very significant efforts on election day, as there have been in the weeks before the election, to try and keep certain groups from voting. And of course, these groups are groups that disproportionately vote for the Democratic Party and would disproportionately vote for Biden over Trump. They are African Americans, Latinos, poor people, young people, people in the inner cities of the United States, and all of the voter suppression efforts to knock people off the voter registers in disproportionate ways, to reduce the number of polling stations in high density districts, to reduce the number of drop-off boxes for mail-in ballots to the point now where Texas has succeeded the Republican governor of Texas in reducing the number of mail-in drop-off boxes for Harris County, which surrounds the city of Houston, a county with over 1 million people. He has succeeded in reducing the number of mail-in ballot drop boxes to 1. So over 1 million people have to struggle to find one single mail-in drop box. There's no justification for this other than a cynical attempt to suppress the vote. And this is what's going on all over the United States. So my fear is that in a close election in a state like Pennsylvania, where they have mobilized, agents to try and intimidate voters in minority communities, this could affect the outcome of the election. And of course, the ultimate kind of nuclear scenario for an unfree and unfair election would be the combination of what's called the red mirage and the blue wave, because the distribution of intentions to vote by mail is very skewed on party lines. Democrats are going to vote much more heavily by mail, Republicans much more in person. It could be that in some critical battleground states, it will look on election night like Donald Trump has won. But, you know, maybe only 50 or 60% of the ballots will have been cast, and the remaining 30 or 40% or more might be waiting to be counted. And of course, they would be disproportionately Democratic votes. If Trump then says on election night, I've won the election and the mail-in balloting should no longer be counted, which is what I predict he will do, this could generate a political crisis in the United States. Now, in most cases, it may not matter what he says because the professional election administration authorities will do their duty and count all of the valid mail-in ballots. But Trump could then try, under the extremely arcane provisions of our legal and constitutional system, to pressure, cajole, or persuade the Republican legislatures in some of these battleground states, like Pennsylvania and Florida, and virtually all of the battleground states have Republican-controlled legislatures. Trump could try and persuade the Republican legislatures in these states to give him their electoral votes anyway, even if he didn't win the election. And this would be a highly disputable act under the law, but you know, it might ultimately be decided by the courts. And you know, we're about to have a Supreme Court nomination approved on Monday, you know, 8 days before the election, that will put another, it is presumed, loyal vote for Trump on the Supreme Court. So this is why many, you know, scholars of democracy are hoping that cooler heads will prevail, are hoping that the election will not be close, and that our democratic norms and processes will be, you know, reaffirmed and sustained.
Yeah, let's hope so. Larry Diamond, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.